BioCentury This Week is brought to you by Icon Biotech. As a world-leading healthcare intelligence and clinical research organization dedicated to the needs of small and mid-sized biopharma companies, Icon Biotech helps biotech organizations meet their critical milestones and deliver data and evidence-based results to investors, large pharma partners, and regulatory authorities. Icon Biotech advances clinical research by offering integrated outsourced services and solutions delivered by dedicated biotech teams and management that understand the different pressures faced by biotechs in their drive to solve today's challenges without losing sight of their mission to deliver life-changing innovations tomorrow.
Psychiatric drug development has had some major wins over the past year and a half. Multi-billion-dollar takeouts for Intracellular, Karuna, and Cerevel. The Karuna deal, $14 billion worth, turned into an approved product for BMS and gave schizophrenia patients a treatment option that works differently than all the antipsychotics that came before it. Today, we are turning to the precision piece of psychiatric drug development. It is still in its infancy and has had some recent setbacks. To discuss this, we have my colleague Selena Koch, executive editor here at BioCentury, and Lauren Martz, Executive Director of Biopharma Intelligence. They're joining me on a special edition of the BioCentury This Week podcast. That's the Biotech podcast with BioCentury's editorial team. I'm Jeff Cranmer, Executive Editor and host here at BioCentury. And joining us today will be a special guest. We have Peter Schueler, SVP of Drug Development Solutions, Neurosciences at Icon. Okay, we'll get to Peter in a little bit. I want to start out with Selena. Selena, you've been watching the precision neuropsychiatry space. It's still early days, and there have been some recent setbacks. Alto, J&J, Neumora come to mind. Can you put this in context for us?
Yeah, well, I think it's always good to start discussion of precision neuropsychiatry with the need, right? When it comes to psychiatric diseases, the definitions of them are notoriously archaic. They're nonspecific. For example, clinical depression has something like 9 symptoms associated with it, or domains. And to get a diagnosis, you have to have 5. So what that can mean is if a patient, say patient 1, has symptoms 1 through 5, and patient 2 has symptoms 5 through 9, well, that's not very much overlap. And if we think symptoms are driven by biology, which I think we all do, you can see that they might need to be treated with different kinds of therapies. But we don't have great ways of separating out patient subgroups right now. You know, there's always review articles that will look at the probability of success of drug development, right? And sometimes you can find ones that breaks it down by disease area. And, well, psychiatry is always at the bottom or very near the bottom. So the success rates are very low. So if we could better match mechanisms to patients, we could probably bring that up. But yeah, you're right. It is very early days still, I would say. Companies are going about it in different ways. So Johnson & Johnson has started with simply subjectively asking patients about their symptoms. So they're looking at insomnia prominent depression or anhedonia prominent depression. And so these are easy to implement in the real world because you just ask the patient, right? But they're a far cry from sort of objective, molecular-based precision medicines that we've come to expect in, say, the world of cancer. Another company you mentioned, Alto Neuroscience, is taking a more objective approach to their biomarkers. They have a whole set of them. They're doing like internet-based memory tests or EEG signatures, things like that. And there's many other tools in between those recently Unfortunately, we recently saw Neumора's lead program fail to phase 3. That was a kappa opioid program. And the hypothesis there, Johnson & Johnson has one of these as well, is that the kappa opioid receptor is particularly involved in anhedonia, so it would be useful for that sort of anhedonia prominent depression. We're still waiting to see Johnson & Johnson's readout. Alto's lead program failed to phase 2 in depression. that one, it was a little less clear how it worked. The idea is that it induces BDNF expression and function in the hippocampus. Hippocampus is a brain structure required for memory, hence use of a web-based memory test to enrich patients. Now, that's undoubtedly going to shake investor confidence in Mora's biomarker approach to some extent, but the company has a lot going on. It has more readouts coming up, including different types of biomarker populations. So it's certainly too early to count them out. I think one type of biomarker that's going to be very useful, and we're already seeing start to get deployed, are digital biomarkers, wearables and things like that. And Lauren has written about those. What do you think, Lauren?
I do think that this is a promising field that's also in its infancy, but the idea that it's not a patient-reported symptom. It's something that can be measured in an objective way. It's something that can be measured over time. You're measuring biologic features that are relevant to the indication, but not only at the time that a patient is speaking with their physician. I think it remains to be seen how useful these are in clinical development. There are some trials that are using digital endpoints and digital markers to stratify patients now, and some things are actually getting through the clinic. So I think as far as biomarkers in this type of indication is certainly an area of development.
Excellent. Well, Selena has been writing a bit on this space, so you can dig into the archives at biocentury.com to see some of her thoughts. Now I'd like to bring in our special guest. He is SVP Drug Development Solutions in Neurosciences at ICON, Peter Schueler. And ICON, of course, very well known, and they have a white paper out on this topic. You can find it by going to their website. It's currently on the homepage. They'll have a survey coming soon. But hey, let's get Peter's thoughts. Peter, welcome to the program.
Hi, good to see you, Jeff. My pleasure.
Excellent. Well, you've just attended the ECNP Roadmap meeting on precision psychiatry in Frankfurt. How did that go? What were some of the takeaways that you got from the conference?
Yeah, it's basically very aligned with what Selena was saying about, as an example, major depressive disorder. And it's a really surprise that, and even people at the conference are saying, it's hard to believe that a complicated organ like our brain is only able to develop one type of mood disorder, major depressive disorder. And beyond all these different categories and symptoms you can develop, it got clear, and that I would say is a first step into precision medicine, but just only a first step, that there are different subtypes of depression actually out there. So in relation to what Selena was already saying, if you have appetite loss or appetite increase with weight gain, that makes a difference. And people respond differently if they have one or the other to the classic antidepressive medication.
I know you've recently mentioned how important registry data has been in starting to unravel some of these subpopulations. Can you talk a little bit about some of that data?
Yeah, absolutely. The problem, of course, is as long as we don't really understand our own brains, we have to find avenues to get at least some hints how it actually works. And these big population registries and the data I refer to about weight gain and weight loss making a difference, this is coming from large Netherlands registry for depressed patients that's up there for the last 10 years. So really thousands of people volunteer to submit their data, and we learn from their data how they behave naturally or under treatment under different conditions. And it really turned out that people with different weight loss or weight gain characteristics differently respond to medication. That's, I would say, the first step into precision, as mentioned, because you could now, because it's quite easy to ask simple a question, do you have more or less appetite, differentiate and say, what treatment should this patient receive? Because those who have more appetite are not the best ones to respond to the classic antidepressive drugs.
And that is kind of along the lines of asking them about their anhedonia symptoms or asking them about their sleep habits, things like that. If you have a meaningful subjective way of subdividing the population, that's obviously a practical thing in terms of implementation in the real world. But there are other approaches that I think companies are taking that are trying to be more objective. Do you have any insights to share on how the industry is moving in that direction?
No, one direction is what Laureen was mentioning, that we try to identify through digital biomarkers different behaviors, a bit more granularity than we just ask a very general question about, appetite. And that's obviously one objective, to find out different behavior patterns. So we can already reasonably well predict whether an individual will have a relapse of a depressive disorder by the number of phone calls or the number of text messages this individual is receiving and even more sending. So the more communicative you are, the more natural you behave and the more closer you are to be healthy. Whereas if you drop with that, you seem to have a problem, a mental and mood problem. And that can be quite easily predicted. But again, this is not yet what I would really call precision medicine. If you look at oncology, we are down to the level of a single person where we can precisely predict what this tumor will behavior be. Now we speak about slicing a population of millions in a population of several hundred thousands, and that's not really yet precision.
Yeah, I think last month we did see a company called NeuroCare raise some money to develop a clinical test, which would be a blood test where you take induced pluripotent stem cells, make them into neurons, and then they've developed all these signatures through molecular profiling and computer vision of responsiveness of cells to approved therapies, which is kind of an interesting idea. I don't know if they're a one-off example or if there are many others working on that kind of thing.
Yeah, there is or had been a major hope, I would say, in the last years that genetic profiling or metabolic profiling would identify more easily subtypes of any of these neuropsychiatric disorders. There was a little level of, I would say, disappointment that you found lots of variants in these big data sets, but none of these were strong enough to really predict an individual response or individual different behavior pattern. So that's why what we are now trying to identify are combinations of these patterns. And big data mining and machine learning will, of course, help us to get our arms around these massive data sets so that we identify there is a small signal here and a small signal there. If we combine them, that may already be a more stronger signal.
Who's driving that work forward? The aggregation of that data and the mining of it?
That's lots of academic institutions actually working on that, because they have the good combination between smart scientists for neuro research, but also smart scientists to do artificial intelligence and data mining research.
Yeah, would be great partnering opportunities for a larger company that wants to overcome translational bottlenecks in the space to do a prospective study with one of these academic institutions.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what will be the game changer for the next 5 to 10 years, that we really make better use of these new technologies, that we just learn how to manage that. And as we learn, we see it really makes a good of progress for us to understand our brain, because artificial intelligence is similarly complicated as our brains are, and it may help us to understand our brains.
Excellent. Well, Peter, I mentioned that ICON has a white paper out. What can readers of that expect to find in there?
Yeah, the good news is that, similar to what Selina mentioned about the schizophrenia progress and new drugs reaching the market, I think everyone knows that in Alzheimer's disease, we had really good progress in the last year, even 2 drugs reaching the market finally after 2 decades of complete failure. And that is really based on better understanding of what are the driving factors for suffering from Alzheimer's. So the better we understand the biology behind it, the better we can address that problem. And that was a good success story. And the white paper is now extrapolating from this success in Alzheimer's to what else can we learn for other indications, like what you mentioned, the psychiatric disorders, but even more other movement disorders, Parkinson's disease. So what should we do based on what we learned from Alzheimer's to reduce this massive failure rate in other neuropsychiatric indications?
Excellent. And you'll have a survey coming out as well?
Yeah, that was already based on interviewing more than 120 researchers in the space, and that will be republished in a more detailed granularity. The white paper is giving the high-level results of all these responses. together with our own insights in what the industry is doing and what can be done at the moment. And it's not only about the biomarkers, it's also about improved methodologies in terms of using adaptive designs, in terms of using intelligence to find the right patient. So there are lots of things we nowadays can do better to de-risk these development programs so that the failure is not a per default situation. It's more hopefully in the future that success is coming.
Excellent. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And thanks, Selena and Laureen.
Yeah, thanks,
Excellent.
Peter.
Peter, of course, as I mentioned, he's SVP Drug Development Solutions in Neurosciences at ICON, which has sponsored our podcast this month. And that white paper, I'll drop a link in the show notes. You could also go to ICON's homepage, iconplc.com, and find it there. Selena, Lauren, I know we're looking ahead to Johnson & Johnson's readout for its kappa opioid program. We thought it was coming in December, could come any time now. Neumora, obviously well-funded company with a lot in the pipeline, same as Alto. So we expect more readouts, and it's a challenging space. We dug a bit into the setbacks there, but none of these companies are walking away from the space at all. So hopefully there's more positive readouts to come. And Lauren, I'd just like to bring you back into the conversation here. What are some of the challenges in this space that drug developers face?
Thanks, Jeff. I think the core challenge is just that a lot of the biology behind some of these neuropsych indications is just not that well established to be able to really pair a therapeutic mechanism with the phenotype of the disease, with the symptoms that patients are seeing. So, when we talk about precision medicine in other indications, cancer is the big one, you're pairing a biological change that's, very identifiable with the cancer and with the treatment. And here, you're pairing a symptom with a mechanism that may be related. I think some of the rationale behind what Selena was saying earlier is very interesting. There's a reason that they're pairing these mechanisms with these particular subtypes, symptom-based subtypes of neuropsych indications. But I think it's a different kind of precision medicine. It's a different way of thinking about it. And again, when you have more objective biomarkers, even the most advanced of the digital biomarkers is sleep tracking, which, we have a lot of devices that can do that. And that may be a more effective way to say how a disease may be impacting someone's sleep, for example, than asking a patient. I think as those technologies advance, hopefully the biomarkers will advance and the pairings between the markers and the mechanisms will improve.
I hope what we get is a feedback loop, a positive feedback loop going on as we understand something about patient subsets. We can then look into the biology, understand something more about the biology of a subset, make a better drug, and spin that wheel again and have it accelerate. Because right now is super tough. I completely agree with Lauren. Like, in most cases, you don't know what the target should be. You just don't. So you're kind of guessing, groping in the dark. And in cancer, you have this concept of a driver mutation. That's very clear rationale and a very obvious what the biomarker should be. There's just nothing like that in these diseases. Some of the progress we're seeing on the neurology side, like the neurodegeneration side, fits more of that driver mutation paradigm with the SOD1, for example, and ALS being a precision medicine was approved recently. You have companies testing GBA mutant Parkinson's disease or progranulin mutant frontotemporal dementia. And so there you have the sense of the probability of success is really going to go up in the near future, hopefully. Here, I think our time window is going to be a bit longer, but I applaud all of these efforts and I hope they accelerate.
Yeah, it's a tough business, but you look at some things like KRAS, and that was decades. Took a very long time to get a new mechanism in schizophrenia, but we now have one and it's helping patients. It's great to see these companies going at it. Hopefully we get some good readouts in the near future. Well, Selena, Lauren, thanks for joining me on this special edition of the BioCentury This Week podcast. It was great to have Peter Schueler of ICON on as well. Thank you for tuning in. If you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. Right now, on our sister podcast, the latest episode, a little bit of a new thing for us. We have our two co-hosts in conversation. Editor-in-Chief Simone Fishburne sat down with Washington editor Steve Usdin to get Steve's thoughts on biotech and Trump 2.0. So Steve's got some great insights. He's been covering FDA for 30 years. It's a great show, so please tune in. Kendall Square Orchestra provides the music for BioCentury this week. The group connects science and technology professionals and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education. We will catch you next Monday with the next edition of the podcast.
BioCentury would like to thank Icon Biotech for supporting the BioCentury This Week podcast. To learn more about how Icon Biotech can help you meet your critical milestones, go to iconplc.com/biotech.